Good morning, afternoon, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our showcase today. My name is Chris Adams, and I work at Access Partnership. For those of you who don't know us, we are the leading public policy consultancy for the technology industry. I thought this morning was a really good panel, a lot of really interesting and focused debate, looking at the regulatory options for private networks, touching on some of the commercial drivers of different models. And following on from that session, the showcase we've got set up for you today, I hope, is going to explore some of those things in a bit more detail and actually focus a bit more on what's actually happening, both from the commercial side and from the regulatory side. And on the back of that, consider why spectrum for 5G private networks might and should be really, really important. We're very fortunate today to have two panelists very much on the leading edge of private networks from the regulatory perspective and the commercial perspective. Henk Verrek from the Netherlands Radio Communication Agency and Shub Agwal from Metaswitch. I'm going to leave both of them to introduce themselves, and they're going to talk to us for about 10 to 15 minutes on some of the things they're being involved in, that they're actively doing, and their views and points. And then after that, we'll have a little bit of a Q&A. And during the presentations, please remember to double click on the slides so that they maximize on your screen if you want to see them in more detail. So firstly, Shub, I'm going to hand over to you. Please take the virtual stage, and thank you very much. James, I can't hear anything.
Shub, you're on mute.
Sorry about that.
If you could start again, that'd be brilliant.
Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Chris. Appreciate your introduction. It's early morning for me, so I apologize for my looks and my speech. I hope I'm coming out clear, but I look forward to this interesting discussion. So I'm based in Dallas. I'm responsible for the 5G core product at Metaswitch, and private enterprise is definitely something that we have been looking at as a serious market segment, and I hope to share some of our thoughts and our some of the market dynamics that we are encountering in the market. So I look forward to sharing some of this information and the questions Q&A that follows. So I guess James, do you want to proceed to the next chart? So just one slide for introduction. Metaswitch is actually, a lot of you may know, we are approximately 37 to 40-year-old company based out of UK and US. We have evolved over time across different lines of businesses, but over the last 5 years, we have been pursuing developing cloud-native software for virtualized and now containerized cloud platforms to really essentially transform the mobile core network into more cloud infrastructure ready solutions. So that essentially to drive two things, to drive faster deployments, lower costs through automation, and really transforming the network from appliance-centric, hardware-centric, even monolithic software-centric to more scalable, automated network functions that essentially provide not just the cost savings, but the speed to market and also the opportunity to launch new services. So Metaswitch is in this, essentially is positioned to sell a full voice and data mobile core network into the market, right? And private enterprise is definitely one of the segments. Next slide, please. So I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes, hopefully, to talk about three things, right? What do we see in the market? So what is the demand that we see in private enterprise? How we think spectrum has, availability of spectrum has impacted innovation. Because, we are not a radio vendor. We do not directly build products that touch the spectrum, but the spectrum policies have definitely spurred the market and the innovation and the players in the market that's interesting to see, and that has generated a lot of interest in our product. So there is indirect connection between our solutions and spectrum policies. And then I'll talk to you about just 2 slides on how our products fit into the whole overall picture, and especially in terms of what's different about this market versus the traditional mobile network market that we are familiar with, right? And really the narrative over there is all about making it easier to consume the network, right? You have a different set of players, and it's all about consumption. So I want to touch on these 3 topics for this morning. Next chart, please. So one of the biggest questions, I guess, what's the 50,000 feet view of this whole private enterprise market, right? Why is this market so hot, and why is it so relevant and important? Boils down to very simply, it's all about real-time data and information flow. And there are essentially lots of drivers and lots of applications we will be talking about in this forum, but it all boils down to data is now becoming business critical for improving productivity, right, through automation, right? So you see automation of supply chains, you see automation of factory floors, robotics that are making it into everyday life, right? It means if you look at the Amazon warehouses, right, you have robots talking to each other to gather your goods and ship them to you. Telemetry, right? Everything from sensors to video cameras to for security purposes at home, at warehouses, factory floors, campuses. Security is becoming important. Sensors are becoming important. We'll talk about some of the use cases, but these are helping businesses and people improve their lives, or simply provide more security or safety, or even go back to the previous objective of driving automation. And then the third thing is AI. And what AI is essentially driving is real-time business decisions, right? So there are some examples that I'm going to talk about is in the retail industry, right? How AI, a simple video camera feed can be analyzed to find out how much foot traffic does the retailer have, right? What sales are working, what sales are not working, right? So there are business decisions, everything from marketing to resourcing to that are being impacted, that can be optimized with AI. So again, when you package this all in, it's all about information flow, real-time information flow, decision making, and latency of this information flow is becoming very critical, right? So not only do you need the data, you need the data in real time. You need to crunch this data to make decisions, and then provide the feedback to the end users or the business users to adapt, right, and deliver the goods and services that they do. So it's all about data, right? And it's about the latency of the data that is making private networking in high demand. Next slide. So here's some examples of applications that our customers are asking for. And this is not a list that we just came up overnight, just looking at news items or something like that. These are real customers and partners with real applications who have come to us and asked us a network to serve these use cases, right? So I'm not going to go through all of them, but there are some definitely interesting use cases like industrial automation that we are very familiar with robotics and industrial IoT. The whole industry talks about that, right? But there are some interesting use cases like smart agriculture. One of the proof of concept trials we did with one of our strategic partners was to deploy a very simple private LTE network on a farm equipped with sensors. And one of the sensors happens to be a video camera in a cow barn, essentially cows, right, cattle. And what the video camera was actually interestingly doing is it had some infrared sensor, and it was monitoring the health of the cows, right, temperature of the cows, so that if there was a sick cow, they would remove them from the herd so that the other cows would not get sick. So essentially helping the farmer in this case to improve productivity and reduce their losses, right? So that was a very interesting, I thought, real use case that I could not even imagine, myself sitting at my desk, right? So this was a real use case. We are talking to Department of Defense who are looking at improving logistics at warehouses with private networks, right? Healthcare industries, retail and warehouses. The example I gave you about monitoring foot traffic, right? These are real examples from real customers who have come to us directly or indirectly with the need for private networks. So I sincerely believe, or we sincerely believe, that the demand is there, right? In fact, we think that the digitization and automation demand is already ongoing, independent of the networking availability of the networks. But now there is an urgency from these enterprises and application providers to say, they need a better networking technology to manage this information flow securely, with low latency, with high performance, so that they can deliver these outcomes that are shown over here. Right. Next slide. So another frequently asked question comes is, why 5G, right? Like, does Wi-Fi not serve this market? And does the macro networks, right, the mobile networks that are out there, aren't they good enough, right? Why do we need this spectrum for private networks, right? So it boils down to a few technical capabilities that are essential in order to deliver that performance, right? So obviously 5G as a technology has the key elements that are required to deliver private networks for this information flow at low latency. But at the same time, right, like enterprises are demanding privacy and security and better performance that only can be delivered with on-premise networks that enhance the 5G, essentially the value proposition, right? So 5G as a technology itself in a macro network may not be able to deliver the privacy and performance unless you deploy it locally or on-premise, right? So there are technical capabilities, and then there's a deployment model that essentially is able to deliver the end objective, right? Why not Wi-Fi, right? So Wi-Fi 6 especially is a very good technology, right? There's nothing wrong with it, but there are certain things like mobility, right, that are inherent to 3GPP networks, 4G or 5G, that make these networks more relevant. You can manage quality of service better. You can configure devices from the network. The usability factor is there in the 4G and 5G networks that can deliver the performance and the simplicity required for the enterprises to manage these networks, right? So essentially, and the other fact is also that the fact that 4G and 5G networks do not really work very well on unlicensed spectrum. So that kind of forces enterprises to think, and government policy folks to think about getting a separate slice of spectrum, so for enterprises, for these use cases, to essentially be deployed at a much faster rate with a much faster pace of innovation, right? So from a technology perspective, from a deployment model perspective, from a speed to market perspective, we feel that the right spectrum policy for this market is not just justified, but it's necessary. Next slide. So what has how do we see the market, right? So we are obviously, I'm based in the US, and I'm looking at the US market generally, and I don't have to explain what CBRS is, but CBRS is essentially a concept of shared spectrum that has existed in the US, and it's still it's going through its process of regulations and licensing, etc. But we have seen CBRS change the game from a perspective of who can deliver these solutions to the enterprises, right? So previously, spectrum was restricted to the service providers, the mobile operators, which is fine, but there was only a single line of delivery mechanism, or the supply chain was very simplistic, right? Enterprises had to go to operators to provide this, the networking connectivity, And I don't think the service providers did a good job essentially to serve the enterprises with private networks using their spectrum, right? They focused and all their efforts on optimizing the macro networks for consumers, but they really were not able to deliver the high performance private networks that the enterprise wanted. So what CBRS has fundamentally done in the US, as we see, is it has now spurred innovation through the entry of a lot of different players, from MVNOs to system integrators to application developers, who are actually going after the spectrum to develop their own applications and optimizing it to their own applications and offering a better delivery model to the enterprises, right? So the headline is very simple, right? We think that CBRS has been able to spur innovation, drive the ecosystem, and provide options to the end enterprises, right? That a simple spectrum that is owned by mobile operators could not deliver. We are obviously a very small part of it, right? We are a 5G core vendor. We are part of the ecosystem, but we cannot solve the whole problem. So we also rely on partners and channels and all these guys to put this thing together for the enterprises. Next slide. So from a core network perspective, right? I just want to talk about the delivery model, right? So it's not just about having 5G, and I said that before, right? It's about having the right spectrum, right technology, but also the right infrastructure, right? So one of the things that we have seen evolve that is coming together in to serve the private enterprise market is the evolution of the cloud, right? So when we talk about cloud-based networks or cloud-based delivery, one thing that I now remind the people that cloud is no longer that single central hyperscale cloud, that has two regional or global data centers, right? The cloud is expanding to the edge, and and it's not just because of networking, right? Like I said in the beginning, it's all about data processing and real-time data analytics and real-time data collection. That is fundamentally driving the cloud to get closer to the end user or the applications. So when you talk to cloud players, right, everyone has their own terminology, but essentially they're bringing clouds much closer to the end user and the application, calling the enterprise edge or on-premise edge. Amazon announced something. Microsoft has been working on it. Google has doing that. So essentially, we see that the cloud ecosystem is definitely helping us deliver these networks with a faster pace, with the availability of enterprise edge cloud infrastructure. Next chart. So from a delivery perspective, right, the technology offers a lot of different choices for based on what kind of player you are, right? So if you're a mobile operator, you can serve this private enterprise market from a from your centralized data centers with a distributed packet processing engine on premise to deliver the low latency, right? But we are also seeing some of the cloud players taking more aggressive stance where they are skipping the whole centralized data center piece, except for some administration and deployment and monitoring capability, but they're essentially pushing the whole network down to the enterprise edge to enable these private networks. So we see a lot of different deployment models. They all have pros and cons. But the good news in the end is that the enterprise now have choices, right? Because just the fundamental availability of spectrum has brought in new ecosystem players who are all trying to implement different models to add value to the enterprise. And I don't believe there's one model that will succeed over the other. I think different enterprises will approach things differently. Some of them will rely a lot more on the operators. Some of them will be a more nimble and agile and go with the cloud players who will offer these networks in a very quick and simple manner, right? Next slide. So I'll essentially conclude, right, and leave room for discussion. So we definitely see the demand, and the demand is real. And the demand is not because a bunch of us telco players think that this is cool technology, right? The demand is actually being driven by real needs from businesses in this massive play of digitization and automation, right? We have also seen that spectrum availability has definitely accelerated the market in terms of who, different players entering the market and trying to solve this delivery problem in very unique and different ways. And I believe enterprises will need that choice, right? Different enterprises will have different needs and choices. And the spectrum policy has definitely helped, at least in certain markets where spectrum is available, like US, Japan, and Germany, to spur this innovation. We also see cloud edge playing a very important role in delivering these private networks, right? Not just from an application perspective, but also delivering the networks. From our perspective, what we see is how can we simplify the consumption, right? By making the technology very simple, not just simple, right? Almost dumb it down to a point where enterprises should not care whether it's 4G or 5G or a core network. If our objective is to simplify how networks will be consumed in the future, right? And it should be, our ideal scenario is one click to consume, right? So if I click a button on a marketplace, I should have a network up and running. And obviously, this all goes without saying that the whole pricing model needs to be simplified, right? So telcos cannot charge per connection, and as vendors we cannot charge in the traditional model. We strongly believe it will be some form of as a service model, network as a service model, or application as a service model that will drive this innovation. So with that, I'll stop right here, and I'll leave room for discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Shub. Henk, to the stage.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Shub. Very interesting to hear from an industry point of view and a technology point of view. Good afternoon, everybody. Good that you are here. Thank you for that. My perspective is from the regulatory point of view. So when it is about real life experiences, well, it might be interesting, but also disappointing, to be honest. But let's see what happens. Next slide. So I have a division in 5. First, a little reflection on the results of session 6 from my side. I'll tell you about the actual deployments and experiences and what challenges we find in the Netherlands when it is about private networks. Then we step out and we look at a model for digital transformation, for transitions and transformations in society in general. What does it need? And there are 2 principles. I'll tell you about that. Then shortly on some pilot projects use cases in the Netherlands, and then a reflection. Next slide, please. So this morning's session had the aim to meet the connectivity requirements of industry and business users everywhere. That was the title of the session. More or less, I was a little bit disappointed because I didn't see very much from the demand side. Only Siemens was very clear, explaining about the needs of industry itself from a customer perspective. I really missed a little bit the customer perspective from the point of view of the other industry participants, the MNO. So if you really want to drive digitalization, we have to realize there are different demands which require different solutions, different tools and approaches, not only for businesses, but also for regulators. So looking at private networks, there is a choice for the customers. Do they want own infrastructure, or do they want to make use of the MNO infrastructure with a private slice, which isn't there yet? So there's a big question mark. If I were a business in industry and I would like to digitalize my processes and be more efficient, it would be a hard choice. Anyway, dedicated spectrum for verticals is one of the tools to reach my goals. Regulators act, however, in a broader context, and there are more public interest involved than efficient use of spectrum. So what we heard this morning is the SES representative saying the debate is getting old. And I agree, because it seems more or less like a sort of decent catfight, what we see. We have, at one hand, we have the incumbents who are trying to hold on their business proposition, which they have for a long time and which they try to keep. And what we are missing then is a reflection on what real customer needs are and how you can fulfill them. And Sjoep has been very clear. He said there are real customers, there is real demand for use cases, and he clearly showed that. But this morning it was not so much in the picture. We have, for instance, a pilot project on 5G private networks, and there are people, they have a dome, and they want to display in real time in this dome what's happening in an event elsewhere. For instance, when you have a final of the World Championship, you want to have people gathering together because that's what they enjoy. If you win, it's a shared win, and if you lose, it's a shared loss, and that's much more fun than being alone on the couch. Anyway, next slide, please. So in the Netherlands, we had spectrum for verticals already from 2012 on in the 3.5 gigahertz. We were ahead, so to say, on this aspect in Europe. We issued, in the meantime, 155 licenses. And if you look at what use it is 60% CCTV, it's 38% in company communications, and 46% fixed wireless access. Looking at those use cases, you might wonder, are those the use cases for 5G private networks for the future? Probably not. If you look at fixed wireless access, maybe in the Netherlands, it will not be a business case in the future anymore, because we have an excellent fiber to the home, and we have coverage obligation with the new auction, which is 98% coverage per community all over the Netherlands. So looking at the current users, there are some front runners in company communications. Next slide, please. And we had discussions over the last years, which had to do also with we had to clear the 3.5 gigahertz for the mobile network operators. So we had discussions with the front runners, and we've seen these examples this morning already: stadium, sports, chemical and processing industry, campuses. What the experience is, it is security, confidentiality, and continuity what they need. An important driver for them is end-to-end grip. And what they say is, we don't trust this in the hands of a public mobile network operator. It is about upload capacity, reverse direction, and real-time operations. I will come back to that in the example. We all know it is also, when it is about private networks, it has to do with cost and mass market of radio equipment. There is a good business case for LTE private networks because the equipment is already available. So That's a good thing, but that's 4G, it's not 5G. Fixed wireless access, the question is whether it's there to stay in the Netherlands. I just mentioned that. Another thing involved are transaction costs. If you have to make a service level agreement with an MNO, it's a lot of fuss. However, if you have own infra, you also have a lot of fuss because you have to do a lot of work. And building and operate a 5G private network is technical complex. So it's a specialized niche market, and you need innovators to help you out because it's not your primary business. So one thing is for sure, that the past is not the right indicator for the future. I've heard this saying at the first day of the conference, so this is all not new to you. Maybe the next slide, please, might be more interesting for a reflection on the whole situation. We ask scientific research institute, it's attached to Erasmus University in Rotterdam. They are specialized in transition management or transformation management. Unfortunately, my digital skills are not that good, so I took the pictures from their report, and it's in Dutch. So use your imagination if you can read it, but I'll give, of course, an explanation. If you look at the left side of the sheet, there's a picture with 3 levels. The level in the middle, that is where you have a structure, where you have a system which is stable. What we see is every now and then in time, in society, such a system is challenged. It's challenged from 2 sides. From the top, with major developments in society. An example might be climate change. From the bottom, it says new practices, innovation, ideas, seeds of change. So that's niche market. If you're in the middle of this layer, you are an incumbent, so to say. You want everything to be stable and stay as it is. Because change is difficult for everybody. It is for me because I'm not digital skilled to change this picture. So what we need in general is if you want digital transformation, you need innovations. You need innovations from businesses which are small and have clever ideas, and incumbent companies don't have the eagerness to do that. Go to the right side of the picture. It's a cross. It's a cross. At the left side, on the top, it says optimization, and that is the status quo. The bottom, it says experimenting, so that's the innovations. If you also combine that with a major development in society, for instance, climate change, or digital transformation, because a lot of companies want to do that, then what you see is there will be some kind of chaos. People who are in the optimized situation, they think it's chaos. The people which are experimenting, they think it's exciting. So there will be a point where there is disruption, and maybe Dean Bubley is listening, but because I also seen his comment, he likes disruption, I guess, and disruption is often needed. I don't have a picture, but in the report from the researchers, they have as an example a picture of New York back in the 20s of the last century. And you see in the streets only horses with carriages and people walking. And then 10 years later, the streets are full of cars. And that's really a transformation in society. We all know that, that cars has transformed our society over the past, let's say, 100 years. We've also seen that when it is about other public interests, that in the beginning of such a situation, no one cares. Safety of the driver or the passenger, no one cares. Safety belts, no obligation. There was only an obligation at first, back in the 70s, for the driver of a car. Nowadays we have airbags, etc. So it's really difficult to have an eye for all kind of public interest when you are in a situation of disruption. Let me see, let me check whether my explanation has been clear enough. Yeah. Also for transformation, people should realize that transformation is a result of co-evolution. Co-evolution on all kinds of aspects, cultural, technological, ecological, institutional. So also our agency, the Radio Communications Agency, you see that we are transforming from purely as a spectrum regulator to a regulator about digitalization. So real drivers for digital transformation is not only the will of society and businesses to transform, but also the need of having innovation. And we know that innovations mostly come from niche markets. Next slide, please. And that's why I posted this morning in the plenary session my message that if you're interested, because the catfight about spectrum, which it basically is, if GSMA says we need more spectrum, we can fulfill all your dreams, but it's really difficult at the moment to see that happen. And that's why we need some spectrum to set aside, and it's not wasted. Set aside doesn't mean wasted. It's a good investment because development, innovation can happen there. Now, very quickly, these sheets, pilot project use cases. We have 5G Groningen with industrial applications, the real-time inspection, the smart helmet engineers, making use of collaborative support of AR and VR, so they can get real-time instructions from other people, not at the site. So AR, VR examples are not only gaming, but also real cases in industry, and an indoor coverage case of drone cycle counting for making inventory. Next slide. Yeah, there's also another initiative. This is a real early day for them. It's in the Hague area. It's attached to the University of Delft. They're going to roll out a neutral host concept, set up an own and independent 5G core and RAN with own SIM cards. Everybody can join in, like in 5G Groningen. By the way, in 5G Groningen, the large MNOs are involved, and so they're doing a good thing there. There's no problem with that. And Delft is also open to all parties. They try to work with end-to-end situations using 5G Release 16, and they primarily focus on IoT in all those kinds of industries you see there listed on the sheet. Next slide, please, because it's time for me to wrap up. Digital transformation means changing models. There are specific market demands, QoS, and it's not per definite so that mobile network operators can fulfill all those questions. There are local needs which might need small cells and also might need dedicated spectrum. Technology developments are there. It's not my specialism. Innovation in niche markets, we need them. And so there is this problem of short-term versus long-term. Now we have the vested interest. We want a pace of change which is quick and not slow and dominated by incumbents. We want innovation. So looking at spectrum, we think there is a need for exclusive spectrum. Sorry, I need some water. Sharing, of course, is a solution, but one main driver is security and trust, and some other people have been very clear in that. We as a regulator, we have to balance the public interest. So we look at the leverage effect of the telecommunications industry for the digital transformation. We need innovation and need markets to flourish, but we also need efficient use of spectrum, and other public interests are climate change, EMF, a digital divide. Next slide. To conclude, we need a telecom market that operates efficiently and meets societal needs, and safeguard public interest. Thank you, Chris. Back to discussion.
Excellent, thank you. Really fascinating, both of you. We've got time for one or two very quick questions. We're going to have to zip through. I was going to ask about the importance of spectrum for innovation and competition, but I think you both made extremely compelling cases for that, with evidence as well, which is very nice. I think very often these debates tend to be a bit hypothetical, but we've actually got real world examples there showing the potential. I do want to briefly ask, this was a question from the floor, do you either have views about time when we're going to see private 5G networks actually up and running? I don't know, Shub, do you want to quickly go first, Henk?
Sure. So one of the questions that was brought up is whether it's going to be 4G versus 5G. So going back to the point I was trying to make earlier, that we really need to dumb down this technology for this new customer base, the enterprises, right? I don't expect them to make that decision or analysis to say, okay, do I need 4G versus 5G, right? They're not telcos. So from our perspective, at least, what we have been able to do is say that, listen, let the market drive the 4G versus 5G discussion. And right now, we see a lot of private LTE deployments, earlier private LTE deployments, just because the devices are available and they're cheap, right? They're the chipsets and devices available. So we absolutely see the private LTE market start now. There's obviously a lot of proof of concepts and trials and all these things going on, with CBRS spectrum becoming commercially available. We see early deployments starting as soon as this year. In fact, we are in discussions with several customers on the side, right? There's a lot of RFPs that were released earlier this year. So we definitely see private LTE happening now. And then it will evolve to 5G as the performance needs and the cost point of the 5G devices come to close to the level of 4G, right? Some applications may go for 5G early because they just have higher demand requirements, right? I just saw a news item from Qualcomm where they've released an IoT chipset with 5G built in. So essentially, I think the market will drive that, right? I think, I don't think it'll be a decision point or an influence point that vendors will be able to force down the enterprises, right? Enterprises, if they have a need, they will see what's in the market, and if it's 4G, they'll go with 4G. If they have extreme needs for 5G, they'll wait for it, and they'll do it as soon as that's available.
Excellent, thank you. I think that's a very compelling thought process there, that let the application drive the technology rather than trying to force the technology into the application. And Henk, your views on the time when we start seeing 5G?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's market driven. However, from a regulatory point of view, you should make sure that there is a possibility for those companies and this market to flourish. So I think I made that clear in my presentation as well. And it might be right that the real mass take-up of 5G private networks will be some years away from now on. Really, that's quite clear.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, and I know James is hovering. Can I squeeze one more quick one in, James?
I can't because I'm hosting on the other platform, so I need to close it because I need to leave it, and it won't run unless I'm in here.
Oh,
sorry for that, guys.
oh,
But
okay. I'll let me say thank you to everyone then. So.
Yeah, no problem. But
excellent. Yeah. Shub and Henk, gosh, we're going to need. I think we should arrange another one soon with more time to talk because we have lots of things to discuss. Thank you both for being so clear and candid, and just putting forward really interesting evidence-based argument is really good. So thank you both very much, and and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.